I feel a little better being able to talk about this. And it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Darryl Morin. I met Darryl through our friend Juan Carlos Ruiz, who brought great passion, power, and persistence to our Latino-Jewish alliance. And Juan Carlos passed away earlier this year, unexpectedly, shockingly, untimely. And he left us to learn from his remarkable strategic thinking and game-changing advocacy. And I'm grateful to be in this work with Darryl, who has unwavering commitment to the alliance and our friendship. He is curious, he's nothing if not hardworking, thoughtful, and a true community leader. An entrepreneur and prominent voice in the Latino community, locally and nationally, Darryl has been named Hispanic Man of the Year. He served LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens, in a variety of positions, most recently as National VP, Vice President for the Midwest, and I am privileged to call Darryl my friend and ally. Darryl, you're up.
It is indeed an honor and pleasure to be with you here today. And let me just start off by, I don't know if it was divine intervention or what, but as I was walking in here, I don't know if some of you have heard, the Mexican government's opening up the consulate in time. And I knew it was in the general area. I didn't know exactly where. So I was walking up this morning, and most of you will see it as you walk out the front doors. If you keep walking across the street, that's the new Mexican consulate, right? With the flag up there, with the sign. Let me pull out my remarks here really quick. And let me just say once again, what an honor it is to be invited to come and speak before you today. I want to thank the entire Jewish Community Relations Council of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation for this invitation. Nikki, Elana, what can I say about the outstanding work that you do every day here in our community? As Elana mentioned, I was first introduced to her by Juan Carlos Ruiz, a good friend, a dear friend whose spirit will be missed, but remembered, as well as his work. Together, we formed our Latino-Jewish Alliance, led by the JCRC and LULAC of Wisconsin. What was surprising, although it shouldn't have been, was the commonality we found between our two communities. Strong and sustaining faith, a love and commitment to family, and a strong work ethic. And as we continue to dig deeper down into the issues that we had, what we found was, forgive me, I'm sliding off the sheet here, is that when you peel back far enough, at the base of all of our values, of all of our concerns, was the issue of human dignity. Right? Two very powerful words, but today we don't hear them much. And I think Elana referred to it earlier when she made her remarks with regards to the level of public discourse that we're seeing today. Not only was it bad enough when the words human dignity were left out of a campaign, but now we're seeing them directly under attack. Who would have thought in the United States of America that the very values upon which all of our most sacred principles are built on would be under attack in the presidential campaign? My boys, I have a 14-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they can't help but watch the news with me. I love them to death. It's really very sweet children, beautiful hearts. I was just so moved, and I use this in most of my remarks. And my 8-year-old boy says, Dad, how can that person be running for president? Why is he telling people to fight with each other? And that really had a profound effect on me. How do we explain, and that's not the only reason, how do we explain the remarks? How do we justify our actions to our children? Human dignity is a gift granted from the Lord. It's not man's to give or to take. It is a gift that's created and endowed to a life at the moment of creation. And I've always been amazed by both sides of the political spectrum when it comes to this. how people think they can argue and be a defender of life without also being a defender of human dignity. Or how can you say you're a champion of human dignity if you're not a defender of life? I think that is something that deserves further contemplation. And given the discourse we see today, given the actions we see today, it's sad to say, but we all know hate still does exist in many different forms. Whether it's being missiles launched at you unexpectedly and you're fearful for your lives, that is an attack on human dignity. Whether you are physically attacked, that's an attack on human dignity. And there's various levels of it. If you're a child in a school that is not receiving a proper education that limits your future opportunities, that is an attack on human dignity. And that's why I think it's so important to bring these issues up and to have an honest dialogue. Not a polite dialogue, but an honest dialogue on these issues. So I grew up in a small town, for those of you who may be familiar with parts of northern Illinois, called Prairie View, right between Lincolnshire and Buffalo Grove. And I spent a considerable amount of time at a friend's house. So when he was over, Barry always ate my mom's tortillas and carne guisada and rice and beans. When I was over there, I'll never forget Mr. and Mrs. Stark, like a second set of parents to me. Mrs. Stark would always touch my cheek and say, "You have a nice pudding." And then pat me on the head and say, "And a great happy." That was my exposure. So I was very fortunate when Barry, we still keep in touch, invited me to the bat mitzvahs of both of his daughters. And just for you, those who are wondering, yes, my wife and I stayed there for the whole thing. Beautiful, very, very moving ceremony. You may be wondering, what does this hate and this invitation to this family affair have in common? Well, I received another invitation a couple years back from members of the tribe down in the Kansas City, Missouri area. They wanted me to come and speak at a counter rally. There was a group down there, actually several groups down there, planning an anti-immigrant protest. They thought that the only immigration reform policy that should be passed would be a deportation of all these criminals. All these people who were sucking in all the benefits that were supposed to go to citizens. We needed to get rid of all these drug dealers, all these murderers, all these rapists. Not only were they morally wrong, but they were factually wrong. But just to show how sometimes they can try to use us against each other. What was interesting about this invite was the date of the event was November 9th. And who was planning this event? The National Socialist Movement, the Aryan Nation, and the Ku Klux Klan. And the tie-in here, where the connections made between the Latino community and the Jewish community, was that date, November 9th. For those of you who haven't had the opportunity to study Jewish history, that's the anniversary, forgive me, of Kristallnacht, referred to as the Night of Broken Glass, the start of the Holocaust. It was not by chance that this protest was planned for that day. And that's when it really began to hit me, the correlation between our community and how hate is hate. It is not limited to one's faith, it is not limited to one's skin color, socioeconomic bracket, you name it. Hate is hate. And where it's wrong for one, it is wrong for all, and we cannot stand for it. So, sadly, we know hate crimes continue today. We had a press conference maybe a month ago, so there's a picture of it in your handout, your brochure. There was a triple homicide that occurred here not too long ago. A man from Puerto Rico, an attempted murder of his son, 2 young Americans, all citizens, all here doing their best to provide for their families, shot at point-blank range. And I want to thank the JCRC for standing with us and 21 or other organizations from Wisconsin in saying this cannot be tolerated. It's not okay to say this person's going to be prosecuted for murder when hate is the motive. Because when you refuse to acknowledge its existence, it is an encouragement of it. And that's why we thought it was so important to be labeled as such. You know, a lot of people ask me, how did you get started in this kind of work? You don't get paid for it, and that's true, I'm a volunteer, like so many of you out here today. And just to show how broken our current system is going, I'll share this with you. So my wife and I, she wasn't able to make it, today's our son's last day of school, and they're having a special mass, etc. We said, you know, we've been very fortunate. We started our own company, and we said we've been fortunate, more fortunate than most. We should look for something, a way to give back to the community. And we go to Mass the next day, we go to St. Mary's in Hales Corners. And we noticed this one family, we didn't know, but we recognized their faces, and our kids always ran around together in the crying room in the back of the church. They weren't there. And then anyway, so we're exiting the church, and on the door, we see a picture of this family. And it said, please help us save Regina. And we didn't know her name was Regina, we just knew the faces, and occasionally we'd exchange some pleasantries. And so being the pessimistic person I was at the time, I said, you know, we looked at each other like, well, let's look into this, let's see if it's a real thing, let's make sure it's not a scam, right? Which is something I think deep in our hearts a lot of people think. And the more we looked into it, the more and more tragic we found this case was. You see, Regina was brought up and was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And for anyone who knows anything about the area or has seen any of the dozens of movies about the atrocities that happen there, you know there is no Democratic Republic of Congo. It's just the warlords there and who controls more territory. And Regina had been calling for a democratically elected government, and so had her husband. They had both been tortured repeatedly. Regina actually thought her husband was dead. And when she found out she was targeted for assassination, she fled. She wound up making her way eventually to the United States, where she wanted to petition for asylum. She got a job, she worked, she saved money, gave it to an attorney so she could do everything the right way. She hired the attorney, right, to help her with asylum. The gentleman who took her money, a real estate attorney. Filled out a half-page affidavit. Anybody who knows anything about immigration law knows that any of your appeals, any of your case review is based on only the evidence and testimony given at that initial hearing. You have zero opportunity of doing anything beyond that. So anyways, things had caught up, and in the middle of the night, let's flash forward, but in the middle of the night, she was taking a shower. David is here as well, they found each other. Amazing story. There's actually a book written about it, and there's a couple of TV studios looking to buy the rights. They found each other, they had 2 kids here. She's taking a shower, her front door gets kicked down by people in bulletproof vests, the helmets, the masks, the goggles, carrying assault weapons. They drag her out of the shower and detain her. David suffers from post-traumatic stress syndrome. He flashes back to when he was being tortured in the Congo. And the kids are just left there crying and screaming for their mom. Anyways, this little frail nun, it was anything but frail, Sister Joseph picks up the charge. And she put up these flyers, and together we get the congregation, we get the community. Some of you may remember this. It wound up being covered on Good Morning America, today, all of the major TV shows. And we sent in total over 15,000 letters to the president, to the head of ICE, to the head of Board of Immigration Appeals, trying to get this stayed. But a law had literally just been passed called the Real ID Bill that took away all of her rights, to rid of habeas corpus, everything. Finally, you know, she's being detained down in Kenosha. The crews are always there every time the family visits to report on what happens when they leave. And here you have little Christopher. in front of the cameras yelling, break the glass, break the glass. And the reporters were just covering like he had just lost it in the situation. But what he's saying was break the glass because he was only allowed to see his mom through the bulletproof glass. And he couldn't understand that. And throughout this whole thing, and we're getting emails and calls, etc. Throughout this whole thing, Regina always said, don't worry, I know my faith is strong. I know the Lord won't let this happen. And this is even after the British government confirmed to us that when people are returned back to the DRC, you have a 24 to 48 hour life expectancy. So here in this moment, where her human dignity couldn't be under any greater attack, she demonstrates through her character the faith she has in the Creator and in the community that had risen up individually, right? Reaching out personally to try and make a difference. So we find out, this is several months later, she's going to be transferred to O'Hare Airport, where we know she has 3 days before she'll be put on a plane and sent back. I call another personal friend that my father knew. His name's Hector Flores, and he was the president of this organization called LULAC, the League of Latin American Assistance. He was always recruiting me, right? You gotta be, it's the greatest thing ever, you gotta be a part, you gotta make a difference. And I was afraid to become intimate with the problems that I knew existed. So I copped out easy and said, I'll write a check. I'll send you a donation. And now I found myself having to reach out to him for his help. And he said, Darryl, you can't just call me. First, you gotta talk to your congressional representatives, you gotta do the petitions, the phone drives, etc. And I said, we did all that. And the more we talked, he said, let me call you back. About 20 minutes later, he said, can you jump on a plane and go to DC? We're gonna set up a series of meetings for you. And I remember my first meeting, we're meeting in the Hart Senate office building, and I see all these television cameras with the little lights turned on above to make sure there's enough light. And I'm wearing a winter suit, and it's a hot summer day, and I'm pulling this cart full of boxes with all this reference material. I wasn't ready to face that reality, so I just kept walking like I was nobody past the door, found the restroom, and put some water in my hair. And there I prayed to the Lord, because I was going to have 30 to 45 minutes to convince the people in this room, to make them intimate, to feel connected to this story. Because we knew that her life and her kids and her husband's life, to essentially two, were on the line here. So I walk up to the door and pull in my card. TV crews everywhere. I open the door and I see the sign on the door. Committee on the U.S. Constitution. I'm not an attorney. I have no special skill, no special training. I'm walking into this room with the Committee on the U.S. Constitution, and there's a woman who could very easily be dead in a few days. As I mentioned, I had 30 to 45 minutes. Some had to come and go, and they came back again. I was there for just under 4 hours. And at the end, they said, Darryl, we were expecting to come and placate you and just hear your story for Ms. McCullough, but you really just highlighted how broken our system is. And this isn't a Hispanic story. This isn't a Jewish story. I think to a greater extent, this is an American story. This isn't just an issue that impacts Latinos. It's something we all need to be aware of. And out of that, I learned two things. One is, and I've used that same formula over and over again, if you want to make a difference, and each one of us can, right? One of my big things when I talk to children is every child has this unbelievable capacity to learn. We just need to find the right mechanism in each child. But every adult has an unbelievable capacity to change the world. With you, with your friends, through your personal relationships. But I found two things that are always necessary. One is to be intellectually honest. You wouldn't think you have to put those two words together, intellectually honest. But what do I mean by that? Always searching for truth, not just using somebody's talking points, or skewed numbers that make things look more in one direction than the other. We need to put all that aside and search for the truth. So intellectually honest. The second thing, intimate. I know we got a lot of crazy folks out here, so let me qualify the word. You need to be willing to expose yourself to a cause and to others. And Elana, I think you referred to it as building that trust. And she's an excellent example. Right after meeting Elana, she invited me into her home for dinner and other members of the Latino-Jewish. Because before you can make a difference, everybody has to be emotionally involved, has to be attached, and be willing to listen equally as well as to share their views. So no sooner did I get back from DC, oh well, let me finish the rest of the story. So I'm out of this meeting. We were praying I was going to get a meeting with another individual. I can't share his name. And I got a call, and I got it. And I had about 15 minutes. Went back to my hotel room. It was cold. I left the lights off, thinking I had failed, that Regina would be no longer. And then I finally get the courage to call Sister Joseph. And she's like, well, at least you had the meeting. They stayed with you longer at the committee, but at least you had the meeting. And she said, when did it happen? And I told her the time. And she said, Darryl, you're never going to believe this. At that time, I felt an overwhelming need to fall to my knees and pray that you were going to get this meeting. And she's a nun. It comforted me, but I qualified it with she's a nun. I then called my wife looking for some counsel. And my wife and I had never really been overly religious. We were brought up in the Catholic faith, but we wouldn't have categorized us as overly religious at this point. And I told her what happened, and she said, when did that happen? And I told her. And she said, you're never going to believe this. At that time, I dropped to my knees and prayed that you'd get that meeting. So that just goes to prove sometimes it takes just a little bit of that effort to open that door to let a miracle happen. And ever since those, whenever I begin to question what I'm doing, or the righteousness, or the path, am I being led by ego? The Lord somehow puts a stone, an unmistakable stone before me that shows me what path I should go down. I then get back, and no sooner did I get off the plane than my loving mother, who's back there. Can I have a round of applause for my mom, Katie Morin? Can you stand up? She calls me and said, in tears, and I thought something happened to Dad. She's calling me in tears, said, what are you doing for little Charlie? I said, who's little Charlie? He was a boy, he's 5 years old, but since he was 2.5, had been fighting acute lymphoblastic leukemia. His parents were undocumented, and they were fearful to come forward to look for bone marrow donors, even though he needed it because they were undocumented and because of the tone of the debate at that point. So we took on that charge. And while we had gotten hate mail, etc., with regards to Regina, this is when the death threat started. How could you be taking these services, which should be going to American citizens, and giving it away? Our people are dying for them. They didn't care that both parents were employed. They didn't care that both parents had health insurance since little Charlie was covered. They just saw this illegal, who was a son of these drug dealers and rapists and murderers, getting a free ride. We continue to see acts of hate today. But if I share these stories just to share, I have no particular training, as I mentioned before. I haven't studied the law, yet I've gone and argued law with members of Congress. I have never had any medical training, yet I've helped those who are dying, trying to find a way for them to move forward, to stay alive. And I will share this about little Charlie. Towards the end, we found a donor, but he was too weak, it was too late. The doctor said they could keep him alive another 10 to 12 months. But it was via mechanical systems and he'd have limited consciousness. So I was there in the room, and forgive me, this still gets me. When his parents talked to him and they asked him what he wanted to do. this 5-year-old boy, all bloated from these medications, etc., just finished all this radiation. And he said, Mommy, it just hurts too much now. I'm ready to go play with the little angels. That little boy showing more character, more human dignity in those 10 words than all those people who sent those messages of hate combined. So when we talk about human dignity, and what does that really mean to us? And when we say, I have a busy life, I have my own family, I'm busy at work, etc., should I take the time? Or do I engage in that discussion with my friend? Do I stand up with somebody who can't stand for themselves? I always think back to little Charlie. I always look back to Regina. And that's why I'm here today. Because the Lord puts the opportunity before all of us. There's nothing special about me. It's just whether we choose to accept the challenge. And if so, if we can be intellectually honest, and if we're willing, really willing to be intimate. So I want to thank the JCRC for the great work they do. I would like to take just a little moment in remembrance of our good friend Juan Carlos Ruiz, who was really the glue that brought together the Latino-Jewish Alliance. If we could just take a brief moment, bow our heads. And may his memory be a blessing. Okay. God bless all of you. Thank you for all the great work you do. And God bless all of those that we know go to bed in fear. And let's vow to do what we can to make sure they don't wake up that way. Thank you once again.